When we start to look at how children process a loss, we need to consider several factors. Every child is different and unique, and the circumstances around the death will each be different. So there aren't any hard and fast rules, but using the current research and the known theories, we can get an idea of how children process and what we can do to help that. How someone will grieve is impacted by different things. This will vary depending on who the person was and the child's relationship with them, the circumstances of the death and the rituals around it, was it expected, unexpected or traumatic, the age and stage of development of your child, and your child's temperament. This does play quite a big factor. In all cases, we do expect to feel emotional and at times a bit overwhelmed. In our previous video, we talk about the whirlpool of grief, and that it is normal to feel a lot of big feelings around the death of someone you love. We're going to look at each of these areas in turn. So let's consider this for children. Who the person is who has died has had a massive impact. Is it a parent, a carer, a sibling, a close relative, or somebody they don't know? That we do know that there's no hierarchy to grief, so you don't feel more for a parent than for a grandparent. It can really vary. And you can also get an accumulative effect. I was okay when my grandparent died, but when the dog died just after that, it made it feel so much worse. Statistics tell us that a parent dies every 22 minutes in the UK, leaving 112 children a day whose world is rocked by the loss of a parent. In the last national survey of bereaved children, roughly 1 in 29 children, about 1 per class, have either lost a parent or a sibling. The circumstances of death also play a big part in how children process information. Was it expected? Had there been an illness? Was it unexpected or traumatic, such as a suicide or murder? If it is a traumatic death, I would advise all of you to get support to work through and process this. All these factors impact not only on the child, but also on the other people and the activities that are going on around them at this significant time. The rituals around death are also important. Was the child there? Were they aware of the death happening? What happened next? Very often, children, and sometimes big people, don't know what to expect after someone dies. How do you behave? There are no hard and fast rules. Also, sometimes when we mourn someone, it's not just the loss of the person, but of what won't happen, time spent with them, being able to tell them things, having them at your significant events moving forward. Sometimes actually knowing what has happened around the death isn't straightforward. In unexpected deaths, the coroner decides if a post-mortem is needed, and it may be that the police also need to be involved. We cover in more detail how to discuss death and dying with your child in another video. But sometimes there are things we just don't know, either straight away or potentially ever in the case of a traumatic death. If the death is traumatic, your child will need more support to work through the process of grieving. Also, if the death hasn't yet happened, but you know it's coming, in the case of a terminal illness, it's worth being able to talk as a family about this and get the additional support if you need it. The age and development of the children affected has a large impact on how they understand and process the information about death. We know that it takes 25 to 30 years to grow a full adult brain, and at different stages we have a different capacity with our words and our knowledge to express ourselves. If you have children of different ages, it's important to remember that they process things differently, have different questions, and may need different levels of support. Do check out our What's Normal series to look at what's normal physical and emotional development for your child at each age. In relation to managing grief, we'll look at each age band in turn and use that to help us to work out how they process death. We do know that at any age, children are impacted when the main carer dies. In children under 6 months, they pick up that things have changed, even if they don't really know why. So this can be seen as insecurity, crying in protest, disrupted sleep and feeding routines, and a sense of insecurity or abandonment. What is important is to try and keep routines going and things as normal and functional as possible. Having a surrogate carer who can both effectively hold them physically and emotionally and provide the basic care is really important. Between the age of 6 months and 2 years, children start to develop something called object permanency, meaning they know when somebody isn't there. We often see this with normal development, separation anxiety. So when a parent goes into another room, they might cry or fuss and try and follow them. This is normal as they start to realise that they're separate from their caregiver. Because at this age and stage, children have started to build a mental image of their caregiver, they often won't calm initially for others. If someone very close to that child dies, then keeping a normal routine and lots of reassurance is what's needed. Between the ages of 2 and 5, children are quite interested in the concept of death. They'll often ask questions and learn from animals, birds or nature. At this age, children can use the word dead and know it's different to being alive, but they have no concept of permanency and that death is forever, so can often appear unaffected by the information. They often ask questions a lot and repeatedly, so you may need to softly reiterate the information. They aren't being naughty or difficult or awkward, their brains just don't understand the concept as big people do. Children at this age may show some regression in their development, so they become more baby-like, possibly going back a stage in eating, sleeping and toileting. None of this is unusual, and with some good support they do catch up. You may also see anxiety coming out, screaming, crying, not wanting to be left and clinginess. At this age, good routines and consistencies really help with helping the world feel more normal. If they normally have tea at 5 p.m, followed by playtime, a bath, book and bed, then it's really important to try and keep that going. At this age, doing something different as a treat isn't always helpful and can just confuse them more. Between the ages of 5 and 8, children become more aware of death. They understand that it's permanent and irreversible, and that the person who has died won't come back. At this age, children have what we call magical thinking, where they believe it's something they did that caused the death. I was cross and that's why they died. I didn't go round for tea and that's why. It's all my fault. I was bad and that's why they died. So if I'm really good, then they'll come back. They often have a really good imagination and therefore can weave their own story about what happened. So it's worth checking what they understand. At this age as well, children are developing a conscience, so may feel guilty. The feelings and behaviours we often see include compulsive caring for others, whether that's other children or big people. They can get very fearful that other people might die, or they can behave like nothing has happened. Between the ages of 8 and 12, children grasp more of an adult concept of death and will display the emotions of grief similar to an adult, but in a more childish manner. They can often fear for their own mortality, I'm going to die as well, and actually lead to real health anxiety. They also realise the wider implications of death. Will we need to move, change schools? What about finances? And they can appear preoccupied at school and potentially socially withdrawn. What helps at this age is reassuring them about their own health, potentially presenting statistics and facts and reframing them so that this happens in 5%. So if 5% do, 95% don't. Teachers are really important with this age group as they'll often see them for over 30 hours a week. It's really important they are aware of what's happened and can also support. At this age, it's also really important to ensure boundaries and routines as it adds that sense of structure and safety. You might find that behaviour slips and boundaries are pushed, but often this is around needing to know that they're consistent and that's okay. So while it's hard, it is worth sticking to the boundaries that you've already agreed. They do help and they bring that sense of security and normality into a difficult situation. One of the things we do know about children is they often jump in and out of their grief, and this is called puddle jumping. And very similar to jumping in puddles, that it can become quite quick. One moment they can be tearful and sobbing, and the next one fine and running around and playing, and vice versa. This is part of the normal process in children, and that moving between the two puddles is part of the healing process. We do know that children as they grow go through developmental stages, and we do see a shift in their understanding. Often with a significant death, the child needs to reprocess what happens at each development stage. So may go back to asking questions later down the line when they're trying to get their brain, at this age and stage of development, around what's happened. So it's important to answer the questions in an age-appropriate manner as honestly as you can. We also know that death has an impact. In our book, The Teddy with the Hole in Its Heart, we talk about when someone we love dies, it leaves a hole in our heart, and that's why it hurts. Grief does hurt, and the feelings we all feel can be emotional. We can be angry, sad, anxious, rage, fear, but also happiness, joy, and laughter when we recount memories about the person. We can also experience physical feelings due to anxiety, lack of sleep, and potentially not eating normally. So you may get complaints of headaches, tummy aches, and nondescript pains as physical and emotional feelings are impacted by the process of grief. Another factor that impacts how children process death is their temperament and stress levels, as well as that of the big people around them. When we think about processing grief, we're all different, and our temperament and personality do have an impact. Are we quiet when we're upset, or do we wail and scream? It may be worth watching our temperament film and looking at the 9 traits of temperament to help you understand each individual child. None of these traits are right or wrong, but it can explain how one child processes in one way and another in a different way. If you're supporting different children through grief, it may be that they need different things in different ways at different times. Another factor that impacts our grieving is our stress levels before the bereavement and the impact of the bereavement. We have a video and worksheet looking at managing stress and our stress buckets. We consider what fills up our buckets and also what we can do to open the taps on our stress buckets and release our stress. That is well worth having a look at. So in summary, we can see that how children process death will depend on who has died, circumstances around it, their age and development, and the temperament and stress levels of them and the family. We know processing varies by development stage, but that we do see puddle jumping, and that moving in and out of being okay and not okay, that's normal and part of the process of working through grief. We often see some regression in behaviour as children process what's happened, and there can be lots of questions. As parents and carers, it's important to be aware of magical thinking in our 5 to 8-year-olds. They weave their own story about the death, and it may not be accurate and can increase their stress and sense of guilt around it. One of the things we do know is that continuing normal routines and boundaries is really useful for children. If they do ballet or football or gym on a certain evening, trying to keep that in the normal routine if possible can add that sense of normality and a real sense of security to their world.